Laura Bennett retained exclusive use of the family home until the children graduated from high school. The arrangement required me, Mr. Bennett, to cover both the mortgage and utility bills. On top of that, she was granted half the value of my business and the continued benefit of having her vehicle payments handled by me. Laura was also awarded a 60% share of all our financial assets, including bank accounts, investments, and retirement funds. Primary custody of our children went to her, with visitation rights outlined in a predictable pattern, alternating weekends and 2 consecutive weeks during the summer. Child support was set at $750 per child each month, bringing the total to $1,500. Additionally, because she hadn't worked in 5 years, the court awarded her $2,000 a month in spousal maintenance. Judge Helen Foster ruled that the divorce would be finalized in 90 days unless I withdrew the petition. The gavel struck, signaling the end of proceedings. But then, as the judge started to rise, I said one word that would completely upend the next chapter of my life. The look on her face was priceless. It was clear she wasn't accustomed to being challenged in her courtroom. I sarcastically offered to define the word for her, in case it posed any difficulty. Her body froze, and her head turned so abruptly it looked like her neck might snap. She stared at me as though I'd committed a crime far worse than merely speaking. The expression on her face shifted from disbelief to seething anger as she returned to her seat. Her glare was so cold and cutting it felt like it could freeze fire itself. "I'm not stupid, and I know exactly what you're trying to do," she snarled. Then, in a frosty tone, she declared I had 1 minute to apologize or face contempt charges. My response? I calmly said that citing me for contempt would probably be the most accurate ruling she'd made all day. I went on to express my utter contempt for the entire charade. My lawyer hissed at me to stop, furiously rifling through his briefcase, clearly panicking. Unfazed, the judge slammed her gavel and declared she'd see how much contempt I could muster after 30 days in jail. In response, I smirked and suggested she double it to 60 days. Why stop there? And then, because I couldn't leave well enough alone, I added that perhaps if she enjoyed some physical intimacy once in a while, she might be a little easier to deal with. To emphasize my point, I extended my middle finger toward her, mimicking the gesture with my other hand, and quipped that she could ride them to her heart's content. To say the judge was furious doesn't even begin to cover it. Her face turned a shade of red I didn't think humanly possible. If there was ever a moment someone might call an ambulance, it was then. She looked like her head might literally explode. With a voice that could have come straight from a horror movie, she sentenced me to 90 days in jail. The bailiffs quickly grabbed me, while my lawyer looked like he might faint. The stunned silence of the courtroom was broken only by my uncontrollable laughter, a reaction that likely explained the series of psychological evaluations I underwent during my time behind bars. The next day, I received a letter from my lawyer's firm, informing me they'd be dropping me as a client. Can't say I was shocked. So, you're probably wondering how things escalated to that point. Let me give you some context. My name is David Bennett, and I'm 31 years old. I grew up in a classic, middle-class household in the American heartland. My parents instilled in me a deep sense of right and wrong. Respect was reserved for those who deserved it, and your word was your bond. My upbringing emphasized working hard, being generous, and standing by your values. The golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, was a cornerstone of our family values. Of course, not everyone considers the flip side of that philosophy. Do unto others as they have done unto you. While the Christian ideal is to turn the other cheek, I've never been particularly good at that. I've been told I have an unrelenting, stubborn streak paired with an almost fanatical sense of justice. When I believe someone has wronged me, I don't just let it go. I take action. Sometimes, my methods are unorthodox. Take high school, for instance. I was dating Kelly Rhodes at the time. We'd been together for a couple of months and, like most young couples, we occasionally fought. One such argument led to a temporary breakup, a cooling-off period, if you will. It was the kind of thing where we both knew we'd make up after the weekend. Or so I thought. That Saturday night, I happened to walk past the local theater. To my shock, I saw my cousin Ethan escorting Kelly inside. Now, Ethan wasn't just a cousin. He was more like a brother to me. We were the same age, grew up together on the same block, and had been inseparable for as long as I could remember. He also knew full well that Kelly and I were in one of our cooling-off phases and would likely patch things up soon. But that night, he decided to cross a line. From that moment, Ethan was dead to me. When Kelly approached me on Monday, I refused to even acknowledge her presence. The same went for Ethan. On Sunday at church, he tried to talk to me, but I just stared at him silently. Once he was done talking, I turned on my heel and walked away without a word. Later, when his family joined us for Sunday dinner, I made a point of ignoring him completely. He even tried to play video games with me, but as soon as he picked up the controller, I put mine down and headed to my room. Our parents made several attempts to intervene, urging me to reconcile, but I stood my ground. A year later, even after I started dating his girlfriend, yes, I stole her, I refused to make peace. Ethan confronted me about it, and I answered him with a punch to the face. That was the extent of our interaction. When he sent me a wedding invitation years later, I didn't bother to respond. And when I married Laura, I made sure every member of our extended family got an invite, except him. Okay, so I'm not exactly a saint. I hold grudges, and I know it. But here's the thing. I don't forgive people unless their mistake was genuinely unintentional. What Ethan and Kelly did wasn't a slip-up. It was deliberate. If you think I'm an idiot for this, well, buckle up because I'm about to annoy you even more. I have a firm belief. If you make a stupid decision, you should face the consequences. I call it the foolish tax. Drive drunk? Expect to lose your license, pay higher insurance, and complete community service, or worse. If you have a job that depends on driving, you might lose that too. If you mess up, you pay the price. It's simple. For instance, if a teenager gets pregnant because she didn't use protection, her tax is motherhood for the next 18 years. And the guy responsible? He needs to step up and share that burden. Actions have consequences. It's called personal responsibility. I worked hard to avoid paying someone else's foolish tax. Throughout high school, I focused on my grades, earned scholarships, and got into a good college. Sure, I enjoyed a healthy dating life, but I kept my academics a priority. I've always been on the more attractive side, and staying fit didn't hurt either. Yeah, I got into my fair share of fights in high school, mostly defending my principles. I won more than I lost, and it kept me in great physical shape, a trait that seemed to resonate with the women I dated. After earning a degree in economics with a minor in accounting, I went on to get my MBA. With a solid education behind me, I landed a good job at a large company, where the pay was excellent. Being single and having minimal expenses, I decided to try my hand at the stock market. It turned out I had a knack for investing and saw some impressive returns. Life was smooth sailing. Then I met Laura at a party. We hit it off right away, and I asked her out. She said yes, and things progressed naturally from there. I have to admit, Laura was stunning. I laugh thinking about it now because, really, what guy doesn't think his girlfriend is beautiful? But in Laura's case, it wasn't just me who noticed. Every time we went out, she turned heads. My friends joked about how they'd make a move if we ever broke up. Even my lesbian friends teased about trying to turn her. Eventually, I proposed, and she said yes. We got married, and I'd like to point out that Laura had a degree in art history, though I sometimes joke that she went to college for her Mrs. degree. For the uninitiated, that's a playful term for women who go to college not for a career, but to find a husband to take care of them. She didn't find me there, but the joke still sticks. After graduation, she worked as a Starbucks barista, an ironic fit for an art history major. Once we got married, Laura quit her job about a week before the wedding and embraced her new role as a homemaker. We settled into our life together, enjoying a great relationship in a cozy 3-bedroom house. I excelled at work and made significant gains in the stock market, allowing us to live comfortably while saving a substantial amount of money. All my bonuses went straight into investments, and I maxed out my Roth IRA contributions every year. I had my sights set on early retirement before I turned 40. My career continued to flourish, with steady promotions and generous bonuses. A few years into our marriage, I came home one Friday evening to find Laura dressed to the nines, beaming with excitement. "Hurry up and shower, Daddy. We're going out to celebrate," she exclaimed. I froze. Did she just call me Daddy? It hit me like a ton of bricks. Our efforts to start a family had paid off. She was pregnant. I swept her into my arms, spinning her around while kissing her face, already imagining the adjustments we'd make to our lifestyle for the baby. We went all out celebrating that night, though I knew it would be one of the last wild nights for a while. The following months were a whirlwind of preparations and excitement. Then came the next surprise. Laura wasn't just pregnant. She was carrying twins, 2 little girls. The thought of being a dad to twin daughters filled me with pride and joy. I couldn't wait to spoil them and let them wrap me around their little fingers. Life felt perfect. The day finally arrived when we rushed to the hospital, and a few hours later, our beautiful twin daughters were born. They were perfect in every way, healthy, with all their fingers and toes. Because they were twins, they had to stay in the hospital for a couple of extra days. But there were no complications. When it was finally time to bring them home, both sides of our family were there to welcome us. The house was filled with joy and excitement. I couldn't help but notice how my mom's gaze was almost glued to the twins. It was like she couldn't stop smiling. She had been longing for grandchildren, and I'd finally fulfilled that dream for her. Life for Laura and me changed overnight. Realizing that my corporate job was demanding too much of my time, I decided to prioritize my family. With the financial cushion I'd built through investments, I made the bold move to start my own company. Since I already had success in the stock market and had been informally managing portfolios for friends and relatives, I obtained the necessary licenses to open my own investment firm. Many of the people I had been helping casually became my first official clients. Word of mouth spread quickly, and even some of my former coworkers transferred their portfolios to me. Within a year, my client base had grown, and others were recommending me to their friends. Business was booming, and life felt like it couldn't get any better. But when you're on top of the world, there's often only one direction to go, down. It all started at the twins' second birthday party. Laura and I pulled out all the stops, turning it into a big celebration even though the girls wouldn't remember it. We knew they'd enjoy watching the videos one day. Family from both sides gathered, and everyone seemed to be having a fantastic time. That is, until I overheard a conversation that shattered everything. I had just used the en-suite bathroom in our bedroom because the hall bathroom was occupied. As I approached the door to rejoin the party, I heard my mom talking to her sister in the hallway. "I still can't figure out where those blue eyes come from," she remarked. Her sister, Tessa, suggested, "Maybe you should ask David about it." My mom replied, "I don't even want to think about what would happen if he found out they're not his. He's so happy. It would destroy him." Her words were like a dagger to my heart. I froze, unable to move. Quietly, I backed away and locked myself in the bathroom. My mind raced. They had to be mine. I desperately tried to recall if anyone in either of our families had blue eyes. My eyes were a dull brown, and Laura's were hazel, or so I thought. Running through a mental catalog of relatives, the only person with non-brown eyes I could think of was my cousin Sarah, whose green eyes came from her stepfather's side. On Laura's side, no one came to mind with blue eyes. I stayed in the bathroom for a while, trying to compose myself. Eventually, I realized I had to return to the party before someone noticed my absence. For the rest of the day, I played the role of a happy father, but my thoughts were consumed by what I'd overheard. Later that evening, after everyone had left and the girls were asleep, I studied their features closely. Some traits resembled Laura, but none seemed to definitively connect them to me. The next day, while Laura napped with the girls, I discreetly ordered DNA testing kits and had them delivered to my office to keep the purchases private. I also started researching private investigators, as my suspicion that Laura had been unfaithful nearly 3 years ago grew stronger. If she had cheated back then, was it still ongoing? I needed answers. Within a few days, the testing supplies arrived. Meanwhile, I hired a private investigation firm called Pro Investigations to dig into Laura's activities. They specialized in accessing phones, tablets, and laptops, and I provided them with all the information they needed. At the same time, I began making financial moves to protect my assets. If the girls were mine and Laura wasn't cheating, no harm would be done. But if my worst fears were confirmed, I refused to fund her betrayal or support children that weren't mine. While I felt for the girls, I also had to think about myself. 2 weeks later, the results came back. I locked my office door and opened the envelope with shaking hands. The truth hit me like a ton of bricks. The girls weren't mine. Deep down, I had suspected it, but seeing it in writing broke me. I sat there and cried for an hour. The next day, my private investigator met with me and handed over all the evidence he had gathered. Not only had Laura cheated on me back then, but she was still seeing the same man, her blue-eyed, blonde-haired personal trainer. They met a couple of times a week, and she even took the girls to his apartment. The audio recordings revealed that they both knew he was the biological father. The following afternoon, I scheduled a meeting with a divorce lawyer. When he started talking about prioritizing the children's well-being, I shut him down. I wasn't interested in traditional advice. I instructed him to prepare the paperwork, but to hold off on filing until I decided the timing was right. Over the next 2 months, I quietly transferred assets and ensured I had no liquid net worth on paper. Laura would get nothing beyond what the court required. The day of reckoning arrived. That weekend, my cousin Ethan, yes, the same one who had betrayed me years ago, and his wife Kelly came over. Laura was confused, especially when I told her they had visited me at my office a couple of weeks prior. What I said next changed everything. I'd love to tell you that my cousin James and his wife Kelly showed up at my office out of the goodness of their hearts, eager to patch things up after years of bad blood. And yes, they did visit me. They apologized profusely, acknowledging their past mistakes, and I accepted. That part is absolutely true. I told them I forgave them, and we shook hands, finally putting old grudges behind us. But let's not get carried away with sentimentality. There are a few other details I've conveniently left out. Let me fill in the blanks. You see, Kelly's family isn't exactly made up of upstanding citizens. Some of her relatives are the kind of people who look like they were born to intimidate. They're big, rough types who don't mind throwing fists in bar brawls or bending a few minor laws when it suits them. There's even some local chatter, though it's nothing but unsubstantiated gossip, that a few of them work as enforcers for certain unsavory businessmen in town. Whether it's true or not, they're the kind of people you wouldn't want to cross. Now, coincidentally, just days before James and Kelly stopped by, the local news ran a story about a brutal mugging outside a gym. A personal trainer had been ambushed by 5 masked assailants as he left work. According to the report, they didn't just rob him. They completely destroyed him. They took his wallet, stripped him of his clothes, and beat him so severely that he ended up with a broken jaw, a shattered nose, multiple broken ribs, a fractured arm, a dislocated kneecap, and ruptured testicles. Doctors say he'll recover eventually, at least physically, but let's just say his chances of fathering children again are slim to none. As if that weren't enough, his car was stolen and dismantled at a chop shop, his credit cards were maxed out, his bank accounts were emptied, and his identity was sold on the dark web. He's looking at years of legal and financial headaches. Now, would you believe it? The victim was blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and happened to be a personal trainer at Laura's gym. Life is full of odd little coincidences, isn't it? I couldn't help but notice that Laura was unusually downcast the week of the attack. She moped around the house, barely saying a word. I even suggested upgrading our home security, given the rising crime rate, but she just waved me off. She was clearly rattled, though she didn't say why. By Monday, her mood hadn't improved, but I was focused on more important matters. It was time to finalize my plans. That morning, I called my lawyer and told him to move forward with filing the divorce paperwork. We scheduled Laura to be served on Friday. My lawyer, ever the voice of reason, tried once again to convince me to reconsider some of my terms, but I was adamant. Laura could have the house and the investments, but I wasn't going to pay her a cent more. If she wanted the house, she'd have to take on the mortgage and the utility bills. And as for the investments, well, there hadn't been anything in those accounts for weeks. Giving her 100% of nothing didn't exactly hurt my feelings. Over the next few days, I made my final preparations. For weeks, I'd been slowly and quietly moving my belongings out of the house. My tools and larger items had already been stored at James and Kelly's ranch, while smaller possessions were tucked away in a one-bedroom apartment I'd rented. The apartment was owned by an LLC with offshore connections, making it nearly impossible to trace back to me. Laura wouldn't suspect a thing until it was too late. Friday finally arrived. That morning, I left for work as usual, But instead of parking my car, I met James, who helped me move my truck. Leaving my car at the office, I took the truck to the bank and emptied every account, leaving a token $100 in checking and savings. I also cleared out the safety deposit box, combining its contents with the cash I'd already stashed. I wasn't about to risk a new box being traced or a wire transfer raising any red flags. You might wonder why I trusted James and Kelly, given our history. The answer is simple: leverage. The mortgage on their ranch is held by that same offshore LLC, and they know better than to bite the hand that feeds them. And despite everything, James is still family. In our family, loyalty runs deep, and betrayal is a line you don't cross unless you're ready to deal with the consequences. For James and Kelly, helping me was as much about making amends as it was about securing their own future. After finishing my errands, I returned home late that morning. Parking a few blocks away, I used the GPS tracker I'd installed on Laura's car to confirm her location. As expected, she was at the mall. Perfect. I hurried home, parked in the driveway, and began loading the last of my belongings into the truck. Most of my things were already packed and waiting in the garage, so it didn't take long. For the remaining clothes in the closet and dresser, I didn't bother folding or organizing. I just grabbed armfuls, hangers and all, and tossed them into the cab. Within minutes, the house was stripped of anything I cared about. I didn't bother locking the doors or closing the garage as I drove away. Halfway down the street, my phone rang. It was Laura. I didn't answer, but I figured she discovered her cards weren't working. Watching the GPS tracker, I saw her car heading straight for the house. Laughing to myself, I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and kept driving. By the time Laura arrived, I was long gone. I pulled up to my new apartment, unloaded everything, and began setting up my new life. It didn't take long to put everything in its place, and a few beers later, I was finally able to sit back and relax in my recliner. My new phone rang, and I answered immediately. Only a handful of people had this number, and Laura wasn't one of them. The voice on the other end informed me that she'd been served and assured me that the video was on its way. "Thanks," I said before hanging up. 15 minutes later, the video landed in my email. I opened it and watched as Laura's expression shifted from confusion to shock. Shocked doesn't even begin to describe her reaction. For a moment, I considered saving the video to rewatch later, but instead, I simply leaned back in my chair, finished my beer, and enjoyed the feeling of freedom. The video of Laura being served ended far too quickly for my liking. It only captured the moment she collapsed to the floor after being handed the papers. The process server, professional as ever, checked to make sure she wasn't injured, then calmly walked away. That was it. I would have given anything to witness what happened next. When she started reading the divorce petition and saw the DNA results and video evidence of her infidelity, that was the reaction I really wanted to see. From there, things slowed to a crawl. Calls began flooding into my old office. Laura had clearly gone into panic mode and was desperately trying to reach me. When she was told I'd resigned 2 weeks earlier, she refused to believe it and insisted on speaking to me. Her frustration eventually drove her to show up in person, demanding answers. That didn't end well. Security was called, and when her shouting became disruptive, the police escorted her off the premises. James wasn't spared, either. Laura must have suspected his involvement in my sudden decision to file for divorce. She called him incessantly, trying to pry information out of him. James handled it efficiently, making a few key calls and ensuring that restraining orders were filed on behalf of both himself and my former workplace. This put an end to her harassment, though I could imagine it only added to her growing stress. 2 weeks later, my lawyer contacted her to confirm who her legal representation was. She didn't have one yet. Laura was running out of money fast. I'd left her with just the cash in her purse and a token $200 in our joint accounts, and she'd begun leaning heavily on her parents for support. Meanwhile, I enjoyed a rare stretch of calm. With no immediate obligations and all my preparations complete, I took a break from projects and laid low, ensuring there was nothing left for her to exploit. Eventually, Laura hired a lawyer, and meetings were scheduled. Predictably, I refused to attend in person, leaving my lawyer with firm instructions: not a penny more. The negotiations went about as well as I'd expected, meaning not well at all. Tempers flared on both sides, and arbitration was soon required. Reluctantly, I attended. It didn't take long for things to spiral out of control. Laura wasted no time launching into accusations. "Where's all the money, you idiot?" she spat across the table. Feigning confusion, I asked, "What money?" "All our money," she snapped. "We're flat broke." I sighed theatrically. "I'm living in a cheap, single-bedroom apartment," I said. "All the investments vanished in a catastrophic gamble, an investment in a cheating wife." It wasn't exactly a lie. The accounts were empty, as far as anyone could see. What Laura didn't know was that the funds had been carefully and meticulously moved into offshore accounts, untraceable and completely out of her reach. I left out those details, of course. Laura's lawyer argued for access to assets that no longer existed, while mine made a seemingly generous offer. "We'll give her the house, with her name as the sole owner on the title. The mortgage is maxed out," Laura shouted. "I can't afford the payments." That wasn't my problem. Child support? I pointed out that the DNA results made it clear the children weren't mine. Spousal maintenance? No job, no income, no alimony, I stated firmly. She demanded a percentage of the liquid assets, but I reminded her there were none. "Good luck with that," I said. "As for the business, there's nothing left there either." Arbitration failed spectacularly. The next stop was court, where I found myself in front of Judge Helen Foster, a notorious hardliner with a reputation for being especially harsh on men, particularly in cases involving infidelity. I knew the deck was stacked against me. Criticize my tactics if you want, but I wasn't careless. I knew the court would scrutinize the account records, and I'd prepared for it. I'd spent weeks moving money through various banks and accounts, withdrawing cash, and depositing it in small amounts under different names. Kelly's family had been instrumental in helping me navigate the legal gray areas. One of their side businesses, a gag gift shop, specialized in novelty fake IDs. For a small fee, they'd even omit the "for entertainment purposes only" disclaimer. While I didn't rely on the IDs for serious matters, the principle was the same. They were experts at making things disappear. 60 days into my 90-day county jail sentence, I was back in Judge Foster's courtroom. She fixed me with a glare that could have melted steel. "Well," she sneered, "have you learned your lesson yet? About not marrying a cheating spouse?" I replied, "Yes, I learned that long before your courtroom." Her face darkened. "I meant your attitude in court." I smirked. "My attitude? No complaints here. But I do worry about your blood pressure." Her jaw tightened, and her voice dripped with sarcasm as she reminded me that she could extend my sentence by 30 days. Moving on, she questioned why I hadn't made child support or spousal maintenance payments. "Not my kids, not my responsibility," I repeated. As for spousal maintenance, I reminded her that I had no income to provide it. Judge Foster's frustration reached a boiling point. "Perhaps I need to explain things in a way a fifth grader could understand," she snapped. "Take it easy, Your Honor," I replied, my tone as casual as ever. "I'd hate for your bench to catch fire from all the flames you're snorting." The vein on her forehead throbbed dangerously as she glared at me. I leaned back, satisfied. Whatever else came next, I wasn't about to let her, or anyone else, get the last word. By this point, I was beginning to suspect that Judge Foster didn't like me very much. I mean, I was sitting in jail, cut off from any access to money, and somehow still being berated for not paying support to a cheating ex-wife. Irony of ironies, it was her decision to put me here in the first place. I suggested she might want to explain why it was her own ruling that was preventing the funds she claimed I owed from ever reaching Laura, or that other fallen woman she'd been funneling money to. My tone, naturally, was dripping with sarcasm as I asked if I needed to explain it more slowly for her. Unsurprisingly, my remarks didn't go over well. Before I could continue, I was escorted back to my cell and handed another 90 days to serve. That made 30 days for my original sentence, 30 more from her earlier fit of rage, and now another 30 for my latest courtroom antics. Honestly, though, it wasn't as bad as you might think. Sure, the food wasn't great, but it was edible. I had a bed to sleep in, plenty of time to relax, and access to exercise equipment. I made good use of the weights and machines, staying in excellent shape. Word of my courtroom shenanigans spread quickly through the jail, earning me some unexpected popularity. It didn't hurt that Kelly's family had a few connections that made my stay relatively smooth. Let's just say that people who might have considered giving me trouble thought twice when they realized who my extended family was. There was only one real issue, and it came from Laura's less-than-brilliant cousin. This genius decided he'd get arrested on a minor charge, spend a week in jail, and teach me a lesson. Unfortunately for him, the entire jail population seemed to recognize him before he even stepped foot inside. His plan was obvious to everyone, and it didn't take much effort to thwart it. The first incident happened in the yard. A football, coincidentally, came flying at him, striking him square in the stomach and sending him sprawling. The offender apologized profusely. Moments later, as he continued his trek toward me, a basketball hit him in the face. Another apology followed. He still didn't get the message, so when someone accidentally elbowed him while helping him up, he should have reconsidered his mission. But no, he persisted. When he finally reached me, he attempted a poorly executed sucker punch. I was ready. I spun around and delivered a kick to his groin that would have made a pro kicker proud. If it had been a football, it would have cleared 65 yards. That was the last straw for him. He spent the next 2 days in the infirmary and the rest of his week avoiding the yard altogether, hiding in his cell until his release. Back in court, Judge Foster was itching for an apology. "Are you ready to say you're sorry, Mr. Bennett?" she asked, her tone dripping with disdain. "For what, exactly?" I replied innocently. "For your vile outburst in my courtroom," she snapped. Feigning confusion, I said, "I really don't know what you're talking about." Her frustration was evident as she warned me to watch my tone or risk having my sentence extended again. I sighed dramatically and commented that perhaps another judge might take over soon since she seemed on the verge of a stroke. I even suggested stomping my feet to see if an EMT might be necessary. Her face turned red, but before she could respond, I moved on to address the more pressing matters at hand. I pointed out that no child support, maintenance, mortgage, or utility payments had been made, not because I was unwilling, but because I was physically unable to comply. "I'm in jail, Your Honor," I reminded her. "I can't work, I have no income, and I have no access to money. The children aren't mine, and my ex-wife cheated on me. Maybe she should charge people for her lifestyle instead of expecting me to pay for it." Laura's lawyer, clearly desperate, interjected with a new revelation. He explained that despite the court's order, Laura hadn't been able to claim her share of my business. Mr. Bennett sold the company to an overseas entity 2 months before filing for divorce, he said. "We've been unable to determine the actual owners or enforce the order." As if on cue, an attractive woman in a sharp suit stepped forward. She introduced herself as a representative of the board of directors for the firm that had purchased my business. She argued that the court's order granting Laura a share of the company was invalid, as the sale had occurred before the divorce proceedings began. "This business has no connection to Mrs. Bennett or the marriage," she stated firmly. "Any claims of ownership are baseless." The judge turned to her, asking, "What about the money from the sale?" The woman replied smoothly, "The transfer of ownership and payments were conducted overseas. To my knowledge, those funds never entered U.S. jurisdiction. Any claim to those funds would need to be pursued with Mr. Bennett in the country where the money is currently held." Laura's lawyer pressed further. "And which country would that be?" "Initially, the funds were transferred to Belgium," she said. "After that, they were moved again, but I'm not privy to where." The courtroom fell silent as the implications sank in. Laura's lawyer, visibly agitated, explained that Laura was struggling financially. The house was in foreclosure after 3 months of missed mortgage payments, and the utilities were on the brink of being cut off. Laura had found work as a waitress at a local diner, but her income wasn't enough to maintain the house. Her parents had been helping, but they were stretched thin. The judge turned her attention back to me. "You have 1 week to bring all payments up to date," she demanded. I couldn't resist a sarcastic response. "What would you like me to do, Your Honor? Bend over and pull cash out of my crack?" I shook my head. "I'm in jail. I can't work. I don't have access to money. There's no cash here, and no way for me to comply." Her glare could have cut through steel. I met it with a calm expression, silently daring her to try adding more time to my sentence. After all, what more could she do to me now? I pointed out the absurdity of the court's belief that I had money lying around in my jail cell, waiting to be sent out. I explained, yet again, that I had no way to fulfill their payment orders. Without access to my financial records, I couldn't retrieve account details, even if the phantom accounts they kept mentioning existed, which they didn't. I asked the court to produce these supposed account details, or to show me where the money had gone from our checking accounts, savings accounts, and investments. When it came to the sale of my company, I explained that the business had been in dire straits due to poor prior investments. Selling it had been a desperate move to cover expenses, and I'd been forced to let it go for a fraction of its value. There was no money left over, plain and simple. The court's skepticism was palpable, but I shrugged it off. "Believe me or don't," I said flatly. "If you think I've hidden money, feel free to show me where." Laura's lawyer objected, calling my claims preposterous. I smirked and countered, "It makes just as much sense as keeping me locked up in jail, unable to access money, and then demanding I make payments. Maybe someone can explain that logic to me." The judge, clearly annoyed, asked if I realized she could keep me in jail indefinitely until I paid. I raised an eyebrow and stared at her as if she'd just sprouted a third eye. "Oh, sure," I said, my tone dripping with mockery. "That makes perfect sense. Keep me here where I can't work or earn a dime, then expect me to pay. Brilliant plan." Over the next 3 months, the inevitable happened. Laura's house went into foreclosure, and her Lexus was repossessed due to missed payments. Unable to afford an apartment, she and the girls moved in with her parents. She picked up part-time work at a diner, managing 30 hours a week, but it wasn't nearly enough to cover her expenses. Desperation crept into her pleas, and eventually, her lawyer petitioned the court for my release so I could secure employment and fulfill payment obligations. Meanwhile, Laura's personal trainer, Loverboy, was out of the hospital but still undergoing physical therapy. His financial situation wasn't much better than hers. With his credit score in shambles, he was locked out of opening new accounts. His minimal car insurance coverage and part-time job at the gym left him drowning in debt as he struggled to pay off his medical bills. Karma, it seemed, was working overtime. Eventually, I reached a deal with the court. In exchange for my release, I agreed to secure a job and begin making payments. I surrendered my passport as a precaution, the judge citing concerns about hidden funds and a potential flight risk. With that settled, I began working at Taco Bell and moved into James and Kelly's ranch. I was under discreet surveillance, but I didn't care. Most of the cash I'd secured was already well hidden. For 3 months, I kept my head down. Laura, predictably, used a court order to garnish my Taco Bell wages, but the amount she managed to extract was laughably small. During this time, I finalized my plans. James had emptied my apartment while I was in jail, dividing my belongings among our extended family. Packages were shipped to a shared location, and during casual family gatherings and barbecues, visitors discreetly loaded items into their vehicles. The surveillance didn't pick up on any of it. I avoided going out unnecessarily, spending my time either at work or at home. At one point, Laura began harassing me at Taco Bell, causing so much disruption that the restaurant filed a restraining order against her. To ensure I kept my job, I discreetly paid off the manager, who was happy to keep me employed despite the drama. My legal representation also shifted during this period. The lawyer who had initially represented the new owners of my former company in court eventually became my personal attorney. She was sharp, tenacious, and had the kind of ruthless approach I needed. We had several meetings at the ranch, and let's just say she didn't mind bending a few ethical boundaries in our interactions. When someone questioned the appropriateness of a lawyer-client relationship, I quipped that scruples were considered a form of currency in Russia and that morals were just wall decor. Now, about my finances. Yes, I sold my company, and no, I didn't sell it to myself. I wasn't about to give Laura any ammunition to claim a piece of it. The sale occurred overseas, and the funds never entered U.S. jurisdiction. This ensured they were safe from any U.S. court rulings. The only way Laura could access that money was if I brought it into a domestic bank, which I had no intention of doing. The sale netted me a significant amount, adding to my already substantial investments. Between my overseas accounts and other assets, I was sitting on roughly $10 million. In addition to that, I had $200,000 in liquid cash, split between safety deposit boxes, savings, and hidden safes. None of it was within Laura's reach. By the time Laura realized the full extent of her financial predicament, it was too late. The house was gone, the utilities had been shut off, and her parents were shouldering most of her burdens. Meanwhile, I was living rent-free at the ranch, working a low-stress job, and planning my next move. The court could keep demanding payments all it wanted. But with nothing for them to seize and no accessible assets in the U.S., the only thing they could do was keep yelling, and I'd gotten pretty good at ignoring that. Some of the cash had gone into my plans, but I still had about $150,000 left on hand. I didn't plan to take it with me. It was more useful staying behind as part of my carefully orchestrated exit. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, we held another barbecue at James and Kelly's ranch, inviting the extended family. Everything was ready, and the party was a hit. I worked alongside James at the grill while mingling with guests. Rachel, my ever-reliable lawyer, was there too, blending in effortlessly. Later in the day, one of Kelly's uncles approached me, thanking me for helping James and Kelly get back on their feet. After chatting briefly, he handed me an envelope, which I passed to Rachel for safekeeping. That evening, I made an announcement. The lien on the ranch had been cleared, and James and Kelly now owned their property free and clear. The crowd erupted into cheers, and the party carried on late into the night. Guests gradually began leaving, and Rachel excused herself, explaining she had an early flight. She left with a caravan of other vehicles, her car packed and ready to go. The next morning, Rachel drove to an airport in the next state and parked in a garage. No one noticed the man climbing out of the back of her car or following her casually into the terminal. David Bennett couldn't travel abroad, but Mitchell Taylor's passport was as clean as a whistle. The two boarded a first-class flight to Mexico City, holding hands as though they'd always been together. By the time they reached Ecuador, Rachel Davis had disappeared, replaced by Morgan Taylor. 2 days later, Alex and Emma Jordan arrived at a hacienda on the Caribbean coast of Costa Rica. An old Chevy pickup, uncannily similar to the one missing from James and Kelly's ranch, was waiting for them there. 2 weeks after the barbecue, a bench warrant was issued for David Bennett. Taco Bell fired me shortly after for a no-call, no-show, and no payments had been made to Laura. James and Kelly were hauled into court but successfully distanced themselves. Their lawyer argued that I'd simply been a tenant who vanished, and they even filed a claim for back rent. While no one believed them, there was no proof otherwise, so the matter fizzled out. Meanwhile, Alex and Emma thrived in Costa Rica. Alex ran a small charter fishing business, and Emma managed their cantina. They lived in a sprawling hacienda, hosting occasional visits from family like Ethan and Kelly. They were well-loved in their small village, donating generously and helping locals with financial advice. Alex even set up investment accounts for them, sharing his expertise to better their lives. And what of Judge Helen Foster? Karma didn't miss her. A few years after my escape, I learned that her wife, a notorious man-hater, had cheated with a man. The judge had adopted her wife's 3 children, so after the divorce, she was left paying child support, maintenance, and the house mortgage. To add insult to injury, her ex-wife's boyfriend moved in immediately, and the couple lived happily in the home the judge was paying for. Rumor had it they planned to marry as soon as the youngest child finished college, exactly when the judge's financial obligations would end. Meanwhile, Alex and Emma lived their best life in Costa Rica, their past nothing more than an occasional punchline during cantina cocktails. Free from their old burdens, they found happiness in simplicity and each other.